HMS Victory is the most famous warship in British naval history. You can go to Portsmouth, you can walk her decks, you can stand on the exact spot where Lord Nelson fell. But that's not the Victory I dived. 15 years before Nelson was even born, 60 years before Trafalgar, another HMS Victory sailed into a storm in the English Channel and vanished without trace. There was no distress signal, no survivors, and no sign of it found for over 200 years. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the history of the 1744 Victory, how it was lost, how it was forgotten, how it was found, what's down there, and the three huge controversies that surround this wreck. Now, I've dived it twice, and on those dives we found huge bronze cannon, personal artefacts, and even human remains. This is the story of the lost HMS Victory. In 1726, the Admiralty commissioned the most powerful warship Britain had ever built. She would carry up to 110 bronze cannon, the last British first rate ever armed entirely in bronze. Her name was Victory. The order from above was clear. The surveyor of the Navy told the master shipwright at Portsmouth to build her upper works low and snug. He didn't. He built her tall. He built her heavy. 3 full gun decks, the largest and most powerful cannon in naval warfare, packed onto her upper decks. She was launched in February 1737, and almost immediately there were problems. She required refits just to pass her sea trials, but by 1740, Victory was flagship of the Channel Fleet, and the man standing on her quarterdeck was Admiral Sir John Balchen. He was 74 years old. He'd served the Royal Navy for 60 years. He'd been captured twice by the French, court-martialed twice, and exonerated both times. And he was one of the most experienced fighting officers in British naval history. He'd been pulled out of retirement for one reason. Britain was at war. The War of Austrian Succession, also known as the War of Jenkins' Ear. A British Mediterranean convoy was blockaded in the River Tagus at Lisbon by a French fleet. If that convoy was lost, Britain might lose the war. Balchen was given Victory and a fleet of over 30 warships. His orders: break the blockade, rescue the convoy, get home. He did all three and reached Lisbon in late August 1744, freed the convoy, escorted it to Gibraltar, then chased the retreating French fleet all the way to Cadiz. The mission was a complete success. On the return voyage in early October, the fleet entered the English Channel. On the 3rd of October 1744, a violent storm hit and the fleet was scattered. Over the following days, every other warship, battered, damaged, but afloat, limped into Spithead. Victory never arrived. 1,150 men gone. No survivors, no distress signal, nothing. In the days that followed, some wreckage marked with the name Victory washed ashore on Alderney, Guernsey and Jersey, parts of the Channel Islands. Supposedly, guns were heard near the Casquettes, a notorious group of rocks northwest of Alderney, which is known as the graveyard of the English Channel. As far as the Admiralty were concerned, they had their explanation. Victory must have been driven onto the Casquettes, and someone must have been responsible. They decided it was the lighthouse keeper on Alderney, and he was court-martialed, accused of failing to keep the lights going between the 1st and 5th of October. And for over 250 years, that was a story. Victory hit the rocks because the light went out. But when the wreck was finally found in 2008, it wasn't near the Casquettes. It was over 100 kilometres, 60 nautical miles away. So the lighthouse keeper was innocent, and always was. The evidence now points to something else entirely, something the Admiralty never wanted to admit. Probably Victory's design killed her. A top-heavy ship, overloaded with bronze cannon, built taller than it was ever meant to be. Caught in a storm, it was never going to survive. For over 260 years, nobody knew where Victory was. The search always focused near the Channel Islands, because that's where everyone assumed it was. But they were looking in the wrong place. In 2008, a Florida-based salvage company called Odyssey Marine Exploration was running a large-scale sonar and magnetometry survey of the Western English Channel. Over 4,000 square nautical miles of seabed and roughly 60 nautical miles from those Casquette rocks, they found something. A large elliptical mound on the seafloor, bronze cannons scattered across the surface, over 100 of them, iron ballast, a 9-metre rudder and red brick pieces. Exactly what you'd expect to get on a first-rate warship. To confirm the identification, the Ministry of Defence gave Odyssey permission to raise 2 bronze cannon, a 12-pounder and a 42-pounder. That 42-pounder is the key. Only first-rate warships carried guns of that calibre in the first half of the 18th century. And cast near the breach is the royal crest of George I. This had to be HMS Victory. There were also rumours of gold coins on board. Gold supposedly being used by the Admiral, the fleet commander. Whether that's true has never been confirmed. And it matters because, of course, this is treasure and everybody's going to want a piece of that. In 2012, the UK government transferred ownership of the wreck site to the Maritime Heritage Foundation. The understanding was that they would work with Odyssey to survey, excavate and eventually salvage artefacts for display in British museums. In theory, a rescue operation, but that's not what happened. By 2018, the government reversed course. The decision came down. Victory would be left in situ. No excavation, no salvage. Leave it where it is. The Maritime Heritage Foundation challenged that in court. A judicial review in 2019 arguing that the wreck was at risk from all sorts of things: trawler damage, erosion and illegal salvage, because it sat in one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. The government's position was that an untouched wreck, 80 kilometres offshore, could be managed and protected as it was. And so, nothing happened. The wreck has been untouched ever since. Over 1,100 men still down there. 100 bronze cannons still on the seabed. And no agreement on what the right thing to do is. Should it be brought up or should it be left alone? And that's what I went to find out. Now, the reality of diving this wreck is that it's 45 miles offshore in a busy shipping lane in 78 metres of water. That means you can't just turn up. You have to get everything to line up, and I mean everything. First of all, you need neap tides. Then you need light winds and a flat sea. You also need slack at lunchtime, because you've got a 4.5 hour transit each way just to get to site. and you're going to be in the water for nearly 3 hours. Of course, you also need divers who are qualified and current at that depth. 78 metres is deep trimix territory. There's a load of decompression, there's no margin for error. And then, to make the team complete, you need a boat and a skipper willing to make the run. More in kind of hope than anything else, I booked the date for this dive nearly 12 months in advance. The 13th of September 2020. I picked it on the calendar, I looked at the tidal predictions, and I gambled that the weather would cooperate. That's how far ahead you have to plan for a dive like this. And as the date got closer, the weather looked really good. Light winds, flat sea, the tide and slack were exactly as we wanted them. Every box was ticked, except one. I was running out of divers. People were dropping like flies, and I was staring at a trip that might not happen. Not because of the sea, not because of the conditions, but simply because I couldn't fill a boat. And if I couldn't fill a boat, the economics weren't going to work. Fortunately, right at the last minute, I got enough people together. We were going. At that point, only 2 groups of divers had ever visited this wreck. A team led by Ian Taylor from Portland and the famous Dark Star technical diving team. We were going to be the 3rd. Now, I was fortunate enough to go back again in 2022, but that first dive in September 2020, that was the one. It was an absolutely blinding dive. And you can see that here from these photos, which were all taken on that first dive. We were incredibly lucky. There was ambient light down at 80 metres. The visibility was incredible. I don't know what number it was, 20, maybe more than 20 metres. It was just amazing. And, you know, just not what you expect in the middle of the English Channel. So it was just a fantastic thing to be part of. I mean, you can see here from this photo, which really clearly shows how good the visibility is. You can see I took this photo, I'm not using any video lights. This is purely ambient light. And you can see there, my buddy Fran, she's however far she is away there, 5, 6, 7 meters. You can see she's illuminating the fish. But if you have a look in the back left-hand side, you can see another diver who's even further away. So it was just incredible. And then obviously if you put on video lights, you get photos like this. You can see the color, you can see obviously those cannon down there, and it was just incredible. You know, amazing to think that you're on this nearly 300-year-old wreck that has been dived a small handful of times. So moments like this make it all worthwhile. All the time out, the decompression that you're going to have to do, the cost obviously. So it was fantastic. And then here you go, another example. This is one of those cannons just sticking vertically out of the seabed. Now this is on top of the mound. The entire seabed is flat apart from this big mound of sand, which has clearly got all the wreck underneath it. And I'm sure if you could clear that sand away, there would be all sorts of interesting things there. But, as I see there, cannon just sticking out the top of it, and something, saw quite a few like this. This is actually from the second dive. This is Will here, this photo taken by Rick Ayrton. You can see there he's illuminating a couple of the cannon that have got the lifting strops on them. This is another photo showing the crest that I talked about. So this hasn't been, we haven't cleared any of the concretion off or anything like that. It may have been done by others, and you can probably see the lifting strop on that one. But what you can see is the crest that stands out super clearly. Incredible to think that was done all those hundreds of years ago. Now, you may recall from my introduction, I said the fact that gunfire had been heard in the Channel Islands, and there was a suggestion that came from Victory. Well, one of the interesting things there is you can see that cannon clearly has a tampion still in it. So if any of the guns on Victory were fired, we can say for certain it wasn't that one. We talk about the artefacts that we found down there, and this is a piece of lead that is another one of those artefacts. They used to drape those pieces of lead over the top of the guns to keep, so they would have them primed with powder and shot and everything in them. Then they put a piece of lead over the touch hole, and that just kept it dry and meant that when they needed to fire it, they knew it was going to work. Fascinating, and a great kind of connection with all those people who this wreck was their home, but also their place of work in the sense that it was a fighting platform. At the beginning, one of the things that I said I was going to do is talk about some of the controversies about HMS Victory. So let's go on to the first one, which is human remains. This is one of the very, very few wrecks where I've actually seen human remains on, which is incredible given the number of wrecks I've dived, the number of wrecks on which people have lost their lives. So it's a really interesting question. The first one is, did I actually see human remains? Well, I think what you can see in this photo here is two really obvious pieces of human beings. In the top left there, that looks like a long bone, so maybe a leg bone. And in the bottom there is a skull, which is quite a sobering thing to see on a dive. And when you see it, you don't actually, or I didn't anyway, immediately realise that was a skull. It took me a while to kind of come to terms with that. And if you see on the right hand side there, in fact on this photo, there's also a couple of pieces of wood as well. Now the kind of question is, I guess, how that organic matter, bones and also wood, how come it survives down there so long and it doesn't survive on other wrecks that are much, much younger? The view is that these were buried under sand and therefore they were protected from the kind of things that causes decay. But what has happened is sometime relatively recently, the sand has been cleared off and that has exposed all these kind of things. So here is another photo of that skull that we've seen already. I think it's pretty clear. And this we also believe is a piece of skull as well. And obviously you can see a couple of hermit crabs there for scale. You may not think that's skull. I don't know what else it could be, but we certainly do. And there you go. There's another piece of skull. Now the interesting thing is we saw these on the first dive, and although we looked for them on the second dive, we didn't see them. They were 2 years apart, so I don't know what happened in those 2 years, whether we had missed them or whether they had been moved or they'd been decayed or whatever. But in my view, the presence of human remains and the fact that we didn't see them on the second dive shows that this wreck is dynamic and changing. Stuff is happening all the time on it. And I'm going to come back to that in a bit more. The other thing obviously to consider maybe is, how do I feel about diving a wreck which has human remains? And that's kind of an interesting one. I'll be honest, it doesn't really bother me, although I can understand why it would bother other people. I take a fairly pragmatic view on this. These are dead people. They aren't going to scare anyone. In terms of respect, yeah, clearly we shouldn't mess around with them, but they have been on the seabed for 300 years, and therefore, they're not, this isn't a cemetery, this isn't a graveyard, this just happens to be a place where there are lots of bones and stuff around. What should we do about it? That's a really good question, and I'm going to come back to that one later on. Because the second controversy is really about the human impact. Now, me going there has a human impact. I would say a relatively small one, but clearly we put shot lines down there, we're finning over the wreck, those kind of things. So there is a bit of an impact of diving it. Maybe the fact that I'm publicising what it's like is going to have a little bit of an impact. But I would say there are much bigger human impacts, and you can see there in this photo that is obviously something from, I would say, maybe a fishing vessel, or maybe it's a bit of rubbish, I don't know, but it's ended up on the wreck site. And there's another one you can see there, that's a wine bottle. It's got a label on it, so it's not original, but it is on the wreck site. Where did it come from? Maybe it was chucked over from a boat, maybe it's a piece of rubbish, who knows. This is probably more relevant. You can see there that is a fishing pot, so And we certainly on the first dive we saw lots of things like this, ropes and fishing equipment on the wreck. So somebody is using it for catching animals, and we saw loads of lobsters and congers and crabs and stuff down there. So that's no surprise. Fishermen have got to earn a living, and potting is a good way of doing that. Here is a one of those cannons, and you can see there's a rope around the cannon. You can see there's a load of wood there as well. So that wood, I would say, has probably been exposed fairly recently, otherwise it would have gone. And perhaps that rope, which is obviously fairly new, is one of the reasons why it has been exposed. There you go again, you can see the same cannon, you can see there's a bit of rope wrapped around it. Now I believe I went back to that cannon on the second dive, and I don't think that rope was there, so it had been pulled up or whatever, but it wasn't there. So for me, what that shows is there is active human activity on the wreck site. There's also this, of course, and you can see there those two cannons. I think it's fairly reasonable to say that those cannons, when the ship went down, they didn't end up beautifully parallel to each other like that. They also didn't end up with lifting strops, and you can probably see there's two at the end, and there's two on the barrels. So somebody has gone down there and put those lifting strops on. Anecdotally, I am told that it was Odyssey Marine who were the company who found the wreck, and obviously who salvaged two of the guns. There's another photo of those same guns, and you can see really clearly the lifting strops around there. Lifting strops also now covered in sand, so I would say those lifting strops have been down there a long time, which I think probably ties in with it was Odyssey Marine who put them on there, because that would be, at the time of this photo was taken, maybe 14 or 15 years earlier, so plenty of time for that sand to build up. Now the other interesting thing is, the second dive I did, I had a tracking beacon put on me, and this diagram here shows where I went on the wreck, which you can see is pretty much everywhere, but also around the wreck as well. So the wreck is the big red lump in the middle, or slightly right in the middle, I guess. And off to the right hand side there is a sandbar, and that runs for quite a long way. But what I also did, as you can see on this, is I went off to the left hand side, which is west of the wreck. And when I went there because I'd been told that there were objects on the seabed, and when I went there to have a look at those objects on the seabed, I had some video on the front of my scooter, and this is the video that you can see here. So this is me just on the top of the mound here. So you can see those two guns that I've shown you photos already. They're right on the edge of the mound. What I'm going to do now is go onto the flat seabed to the west of the mound, and this is me looking for those objects that I'd been told were there. You can see them off the mound now because the ground is completely flat, although there is plenty of those little fish there. Now, obviously doing this, I was a bit nervous because I wasn't running a line, and I knew that I wanted to be able to find my way back to the mound, because that's where the shot is, and that's where the lazy shot is, and the decompression station and everything. So every now and again, I was just kind of taking a little glance, just hoping that I could still see the strobes. Fortunately, visibility was really good. But you can see here, I'm heading out, and basically I'm looking for something on the seabed. Now, I expected it to be guns, and I'd been told it was guns, but nobody at this point had been out here and physically looked at them. So that's what I'd been asked to do, and just to find out. So it was a bit of a mystery, and the good news is, I think very shortly, there you go, I've seen one of the guns. It's not one of the big ones, it's one of the smaller ones, but there's clearly, it's there on the seabed. It didn't land there. And you'll see as we move on these that they've all got strops on. So the view is basically that these were on the top of the mound and have been moved here onto the seabed. You can see, there you go, really good example there of a cannon with a couple of strops on. Once again, old, these are old strops, but they're clearly strops. So the whole purpose of this excursion off the mound was to find these cannons and to prove that they'd been moved off, which I think I have done. So what I've just done there is looked at, the human impact on this site. I think one of the views you may recall taken by the MOD is that this site is static and will not change, and therefore it can be left in peace without any problems. Hopefully, I think what I've shown with these clips and these videos is that this site is not static. It is changing all the time. That brings me on, I guess, to the next controversy, which is about the site stability, and that kind of ties in with the point I've just made. A good example of this, I think, is this thing here, which is a cauldron. It's difficult really to get the sense of scale of that, but I think you can see it looking at those conger eels that are in it. I mean, this is a really big thing, maybe 1.5 meters across. You can see it's all it's battered, but you can see there's those big rivets in there, and this supposedly was used for cooking. Now, the first photo of this that Odyssey Marine took, I believe, shows it the other way up. There's a picture from Rick from the second dive showing it upside down, so that has clearly moved. Well, it's clearly 180 degrees. When I first dived it, it was in a different position to when I dived it on the second dive. So my view is that is moving around on the seabed, and I guess at some point it will probably move off the site or will be further damaged or something like that. So, I guess for me, these are important things. So what is a really historically significant wreck? If you were to ask me, what do I think should be done? I think that this should be brought up. I think as many of these artifacts as possible should be recovered, brought up to the surface, and then done something with, because if they get left down there, they will eventually get trashed and lost forever. But hey, I'm not an archaeologist. I'm just a diver who goes and visits shipwrecks. And one of the things that I'm very much hoping to do is to go back and dive HMS Victory again. I've tried in 2023, I've tried in 2024, I've tried in 2025. Hopefully 2026 will be the year I get to go back to it again. So just need that weather, because I've got the boat and everything else booked. If you would like to see what it was like to dive Victory, I've got the full dive video from my 2022 trip that is available, and it's here. You should just be able to click on it and go and watch it. Otherwise, I'm Dom Robinson, Deep Wreck Diver. As always, I hope you've enjoyed my video. I hope you'll give us a like. I hope you give us a subscribe. Drop us a comment, of course. But most of all, what I hope you'll do is go and watch another one of my videos.